Daf Tet Zayin, page 16, tractate Psachim. We are 5 lines from the top of the page. Continuation of what we discussed yesterday and day before yesterday. Again, for those who just entered this class, I urge you to either go back for 2 sessions ago to watch us, the introduction of halachot of the Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity, or to read about it, because what happened today, like yesterday, we zoom in the subject, and if you really not get the full background, it will be some challenges. So, but those who are with us and have the idea what's all about, we're just continuing our discussion, which is Sfeika deoraita bershut hayachid tameh, which means if we have a state of uncertainty that is in a concept of biblical precept, so when it's come to a private domain, it's ritually impure, because Sfeika deoraita lechumra, we go stringency when it's uncertainty in the biblical term. If it's rabbinic, it's a different story. Remember, we discussed many times, when it's come to rabbinic, which is a boundaries, we are more lenient. When it's come to a Torah, we are more stringent. So anytime you have uncertainty, you have to first and foremost examine if it's a biblically or rabbinic. That not to say that we take rabbinic lightly, but here for our discussion here, that's the foundation. What's the next step? Next step is how we treated liquid materials. There are 2 ways to look at liquid. One way, you can say that liquid materials, it's not biblically, it's rabbinic. It's soon you see that it's a dispute if it's true or not. But the key point is, if it's a rabbinic, then it's an issue how much it accept, absorb the impurity and distribute that impurity to others. Versus if it's the Torah, then automatically we hold stringencies, and therefore it can transmit it. So Vesavar Rabbi Elazar, again we have 5 lines from the top of the page. Mashkin itlehu tum'ah ba'olam. Rabbi Elazar maintained that liquids have ritual impurity by Torah lo at all, which means he does not hold that liquid carried ritual impurity. Now let's understand what he said. He said, we are not speaking about liquid that accepted ritual impurity and transmitted. He speak about an initio at the first place, if that liquid has the capability to accept ritual impurity, which means if it's not biblical, then he holds that it doesn't have at the first place the capability to accept ritual impurity, which means the liquid has nothing to do with ritual impurity. Vehatanya, so now we challenge that point, and we said, Rabbi Elazar omer, ein tum'ah lemashkin kol ikar. That's very interesting statement. You know what Rabbi Elazar said? He said that as far as the ritual impurity, you can speak about a person, you can speak about food, but when it's come to liquid, what Rabbi Elazar said, no, help me, what Rabbi Elazar said? When it's come to liquid, he said that liquid doesn't have the category, biblically speaking, to accept ritual impurity. So it means that if he did not accept the ritual impurity, for sure he cannot transmit it. You talk about transmission of ritual impurity, and we talked yesterday and day before yesterday for a great-grandfather and father and son and grandson, all this category of transmitting ritual impurity, that's applied to a category that already absorbed it, or already accepted it. Trace a simple situation. If a person touch a corpse, so he has already absorbed ritual impurity and he can transmit it to something else. Clear? But if you tell me that liquid doesn't have the capability, biblically speaking, to accept the ritual impurity, so for sure liquid cannot transmit ritual impurity. That's Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Yes, dear.
Okay, if you leave, let us say, some liquid open overnight and you don't know who came by and what they did.
If you remember, we discussed in the past, it's a good question, that I don't like to use the word Kabbalistic, but it's some rabbinic advice. In those days they have a fear of demons and things like that, evil spirit, etc. It's hard for me to explain it, but the key point is the rabbis highly recommended not to leave it open. Ancient time, they have all these things. Nowadays, it's hard to say. I personally follow my family minhag, tradition, that if, for example, I drink, let's say, coffee in the evening time, it was a big cup and I cannot finish it, and somehow I like it, I don't want to trash it, so I take something and I cover it overnight, and then during the next day, you can drink it. But if it left open, it is some talk. There are two phases in the Talmud. I don't know if you remember, we studied it in Brachot. One is that maybe animals come there, especially in ancient times. Some talk about demons. It's hard for me to determine what exactly involved with this. Here we're not talking about overnight. We talk about situation at the first place that this liquid attached to something that is ritually impure, or something that gets wet. The liquid get somehow wet. Rashi tells us here that the pasuk, the sentence in the Torah that said "V'chol mashke asher yishateh b'chol kli yitma," the Torah said that every liquid that was drank by any vessel become ritually impure. It's not applied to the liquid itself. Listen carefully. It's applied to what? Rashi said that if you take something that is ritually impure and put a liquid material on that one, so they do the machshirei ochel, preparation of food, to accept ritual impurity. So it means Rabbi Lazar holds so far that liquid doesn't have the capability or the category of accepting ritual impurity. Teida, you should know, I'm going a little slow to make sure that everyone is at the same page, so please stop me if I'm too fast or too slow, right? Because always I get those emails, David will tell you, you're great, but can you make it slower? Can you make it faster? So it's hard. Anyway, Teida, Sharei Id Yosef ben Yoezer ish tzreida. If you remember, we studied Yosef ben Yoezer last week when we studied Pirkei Avot. It's also a famous Mishnah in Tractate Eduyot, chapter 8. So he said, Al ayal kamtza dachan. So very interesting to say that this is called a grasshopper. Some category of grasshopper are kosher. Do you know that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So he called that grasshopper ayal kamtza. That's it's because Rambam said that it looks very similar to a ram. Just if you zoom into that grasshopper and you getting close, it's very, the Rambam said its appearance is very similar to a ram. Just the facial, the head, etc. So that's the reason why they call it in that name. So Yosef ben Yoezer, he gave a testimony over that grasshopper. That what? That it's dachan. What is dachan? That he says that it's kosher and it's pure and you can use it, because the Torah in Sefer Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus chapter 11, the Torah gives us a clear list of certain animals that can be eaten. So there is a disputation both in Gemara in Chulin, page 59, and also in Gemara in Avodah Zarah 37, if this type of grasshopper, which one of them is accepted and which not. Your faces looks like you're never going to eat this, right?
That's right.
I have a friend, he's not religious. After the service, he and others went to, I think it was Beijing, if I'm not mistaken. And he came back and he said that they gave them all this stuff, and he said, I ate it once and it was enough. Because over there, they eat everything. Anyway, I remember once it was a sign in Eilat, you know, it's a city in South Israel. It's like similar, very similar to Florida. David, you ever been there? Okay, so they said that it was one time a big sign, if you have a cat, you better put an alarm system around your house. And I was wondering why they do that, and it turns that in Eilat, it was like Makkah, it was unbelievable situation that you have Thai people from Thailand, used to walk there, restaurant, hotels, all kind of maintenance work, and guess what? They stole cats, private pets from people and eat them. Can you imagine? Anyway, so back to our subject. There's some grasshopper that, according to some opinion, it's a disputation. Some category of grasshopper can be kosher. So he gave a testimony over that one that it's kosher. And he said the second category was ve'al mashkin beit mitbachaya dechan. So in a Beit HaMikdash, in a holy temple, they have a large, in our simple language, kitchen. But it wasn't really kitchen, it was a place that they did all the preparation of the offering, which means central place of slaughtering the animals, doing all the preparations before the sacrificing them. So that's called Beit Mitbachaya. Beit Mitbachayim to this very day, it's like a slaughtered house. So he said that all those liquid that used in Beit Mitbachaya, in the slaughtering house in the temple, Dachan, they are pure, which means that they don't receive any ritual impurity. That slaughtering house, the Rambam in Ilchot Beit HaBchira elaborates on that, and he said that it was in the against the north wall of the Beit HaMikdash. They used to bring the offering, they slaughter there, and then they take off part of the outer of the animal, like the skin part, the covered animals, and they slice it in a certain way, and then you have that liquid. Liquid, for our discussion here, it's for example, the blood that come out of the offering, also the water that you use to involve with the preparation of that offering. So all of that, it's a common liquid that used. So the sages come in and they said, look, since the whole idea of liquid, tum'at mashkin, liquid, apply rabbinics, which means what Rabbi Lazar said so far, what do we understand? That liquid is not biblical, it's rabbinic. So since it is rabbinic, lo gazru bebeit HaMikdash, the sages did not put a gzeira, a decree, over liquid in a Beit HaMikdash. Why? Lo le'arbot tuma, in order to increase ritual impurity involvement in a Beit HaMikdash. Because imagine the Kohanim are overloaded with work and they need to focus on their job. Now there is another thing to be worried about, rabbinic decree over liquid matters. So the rabbis removed that in the as we said many times, if you remember, that many of rabbinic's decree, you remember we studied at the end of Eruvin that many rabbinic decrees removed in a temple. It was outside of that domain, but not in a temple. So what we derive from that Rabbi Elazar proof from this word of Yosef ben Yoezer, that liquid will not be a recipient of ritual impurity by the Torah. And that's basically the opposite of what he said in the first Braita, that said that it is a potential for liquid material to accept ritual impurity by the Torah, and the only thing is that it's not transmitted to others. So let's understand it clearly. There are ritual impurity that you accept and distributed, such as, for example, food. Liquid, we enter here to a big discussion. There are basically three different categories so far. One said, forget it. It's not biblically, and therefore it's not accepting ritual impurity, and for sure if it's not accepting, it's not transmitting. Second one said, it's only accepting, but it's not transmitting. Third said, it's accepting and transmitting. Okay? So now we follow that teaching. So far we are the middle, which is, he said in the first Braita that it's accepting the ritual impurity, but it's not carry it to others. In this one, what we said, that has come to the temple service, what we said, it's not accepting. They removed the rabbinic decree. So now you see two different Braitot that contradicted each other. Clear? So they said, Hanicha leShmuel de Amar Dachan miltamet tum'at ha'achirim. This work out well according to the opinion of Shmuel, that said that this context, the term ritually impure, means that they do not transmit impurity to other items. However, they themselves can become pure. Remember, that's the second category.
Question, Rabbi.
Yes.
Here say the term is ritual, pure. I believe you say impure.
Okay, so let me make it clear. Here we talk about rabbinic decree. Yosef ben Yoezer said that pure, listen carefully, pure liquid that used in the slaughtering house in Beit HaMikdash, it's not transmitted to others. But biblically speaking, he said, it's accepting ritual impurity.
Okay.
So therefore, in one hand, you can say that in the temple in Beit HaMikdash it can be ritually impure. Again, let's sharpen this point. He said, you know what I meant by this Braita of Yosef ben Yoezer? I meant to say that all this blood and water that used in the slaughtering house in the Beit HaMikdash cannot transmit it to others. But as far as biblically speaking, the capability of accepting ritual impurity, I said yes. So he said, Ela leRav de Amar Dachan Mamash. But according to the Rav who said what? That Zippo neither accept, and if it's not accept, they have nothing, so it's not transmitted. Ma'ikale Meimar. So how do we explain it? What Rabbi Lazar proved from Yosef ben Yoezer? He proved that the liquid materials were not accepting ritual impurity at all, biblically speaking. And that contradicted what he said in the first Braita. So we have an issue with Rav. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Achada. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, when the Braita said that Rabbi Elazar agreed with Rabbi Meir, it was with regard to one of Rabbi Meir's opinion, which means the opinion that Rabbi Elazar agreed with Rabbi Meir, that in a case where the uncertainty with regard to rendering other items impure, they are pure. Liquid transmit impurity by rabbinic law. However, this is Rabbi Elazar maintains that the impurity of liquids themselves is also not by Torah law, and therefore in a case of uncertainty with regard to impurity of the liquid themselves, the ruling is that they are pure. Why? Because it's tahara misafek, that it's make it pure because it's uncertainty, and therefore he holds that that safek, that uncertainty is rabbanon, is rabbinic. So the Gemara asks, והל כדבריו כאמר דיני פישי. Wait a second, but isn't that what the Braita say? That Rabbi Elazar said according to Rabbi Meir, so that's follow the two dinim of Rabbi Meir. So Rashi here explained in the Klomar, and I elaborate on that in my book, what exactly that statement meant. We do not have enough time. Ve'od ve'haktani ve'chen ktani. So furthermore, the Braita teaching likewise, and so it means that he holds the same as we Rabbi Elazar hold the same as he said in Rabbi Meir. So they said it's a problem. It's the kashi. It's difficult to understand the Braita according to Rav. So now we go back to the whole idea of the witness of Yosef ben Yoezer. Gufa Rav Amar. Since we have the foundation, now we can go a little faster. Dachan mamash, ושמואל אמר דחן מלטמא טומאת אחרים. Rav said that Yosef ben Yoezer said that it's actually ritual pure, and Shmuel said it's only pure, that it's not transferred. אבל טומאת עצמם יש להם, but they themselves accepting ritual impurity. So now we elaborate on that. רב אמר דחן ממש כסבר טומאת משכין מדרבנן, because he hold the only liquid ritual impurities, rabbinic, וכי גזרו רבנן במשכין דעלמא, ובמשכין בית מטבחי לא גזרו, they put a decree upon what the regular liquid, but as far as the slaughtering house in בית המקדש, it's not applicable. ושמואל אמר דחן מלטמא טומאת אחרים, it's pure from transmitting ritual impurity, אבל טומאת עצמן יש להם, but they have independent ritual impurity, כסבר טומאת משכין עצמם דאורייתא, that he hold that the liquid ritual impurity is biblical, לטמא אחרים מדרבנן, but transferring to others it's rabbinic, וכי גזרו רבנן, when the sages put a decree, when it's applied to a liquid, במשכין דעלמא, they talk about general statement over liquid, במשכין מבית מטבחי לא גזרו, they don't apply to a slaughtering house. וכי לא גזרו רבנן לטמאי האחרים, אבל טומאת עצמן יש להם, again, that's only applied to what? To transfer ritual impurity to others, but there independently they carry that ritual impurity. So again, you see here what you remember we said is three different categories. So now we understand that there's a category that can accept it, not transmitted. אמר לרב הונא בר חינן לברei, כי היה לקמא דרב פאפא, רמילה. You go and you ask him a question. Rav Papa was the head leader. אמר שמואל, when the Shmuel said that any liquid like blood and water that come in the slaughtering house in the Beit HaMikdash, דחן מלטמא טומאת אחרים, it's ritually pure from transmitted ritual impurity, אבל טומאת עצמן יש להם, but they carry independent ritual impurity. I have a problem with them. Again, what's the key problem? The key problem is, since it's only one way, which means it's coming in but not coming out, what exactly, how you reconcile with several texts? Kreikan, because the Torah said in the book of Vaikra in Leviticus chapter 7, והבשר אשר ייגע בכל טמא לא יאכל. Any type of meat that touch something that's ritually impure, we shall not eat it. And then the Torah said, בכל משקה אשר ישתה, any liquid that going to drink, בכל כלי יטמא, every utensil become ritually impure. So it means that he himself accepting ritually impure, but not transmitted to others. So how Yosef ben Yoezer said that when it's come to a liquid that in a slaughtering house in Beit HaMikdash, it's not transmitted ritually impurity for something that it's sacred. אמר רב שישה ברי דרב אידי, מידה דהבה ערביעי בקודש. Remember we talk about grandpa and transmitting ritual impurity, so we have a category that's called the fourth one, which is, the fourth one is pasul and not tameh. Help me, what is the difference between pasul and tameh?
Well, tameh is ritually impure and can be transmitted, and pasul means that it's not allowed, but it can't be transmitted from one to another. So.
You see, somebody is listening to me. Thank you. So, matkif la'ravashi. No, I'm joking. Everyone listening. Matkif la'ravashi. Revi'i bekodesh lo ikrei tameh. When it's come to the fourth level, 4, which is the great grandson, remember? So it's not considering ritually impure because it's not written clearly in the Torah. We learn that from one of the 13 principles of Rabbi Ishmael that is called Kal Vachomer. So, and we're going to learn it in page 18. So therefore, if meat touch this sacred meat, so that's part of that category that's called והבשר אשר ייגע בכל טמא. Any meat that touch in anything that is ritually impure, העשירי טמא. So it means that liquid is considering ritually impure, because those who hold that this type of ritual impurity is biblical, because the source of that is the text that said v'chol mashke asher yishate yitma, any liquid going to drink will become ritually impure. So any sacred meat that touch with liquid that it's impure, it become impure. So how the sages allow to have in the slaughtering house in a Beit HaMikdash that liquid which is the blood and the water involved with the offering pure. So the Gemara concluded and they said, Kashya. Yep, it's a problem. So Kashya meaning that it's open for our discussion. So they have a Sfat Emet and they have more that try to reconcile that question. Tashma. Now we go back to Rav. Rav said, remember he said, forget it. Liquid is not even accepting Tum'ah in any form, biblically speaking. So now we ask a question. Tashma, I can bring you a source. They talk about earthware that touch a creeping animal. So the Torah said in Leviticus chapter 11, V'chol mashke asher yishate b'chol kli yitma. Any liquid that used in a vessel become ritually impure. So it means clearly that liquid has the capability to accept ritual impure. Ma yitma. What does that mean when they use the term be ritually impure? So they said, Hichshir. He paved the way of that food to accept ritual impurity, which means this line teaches that any food inside that vessel become ritually impure if it's prepare himself to become impure by water or other liquid material. So the Gemara asks, Hichshir mereisha dikra shamatli. This din, this idea that the liquid prepare food to accept ritual impurity, we learn from the first clause of the line, because the pasuk said, the sentence said, Mikol ha'ochel asher yachel, from all the food that was eaten. So why they need to use the word twice, yitma, asher yavo alav mayim yitma, which means that twice it's written the word become ritually impure. So they said, chad bitlushin vechad bimechubarin. One talk about water that it's in the vessel and it's detached from the ground, because the Torah used the word bechol kli, and the other one in the first clause in the Braita speaks about water that attach to the ground. Give me an example of water that attach to the ground. For example, if you go to the Arizal, the grave of the great Ari in Tzfat, so there is a mikveh there that have original spring water, pure spring water that come out of a cave. So water that attached to the ground, we speak about those waters that come out of certain pits, certain caves, certain areas underground. Utzriche, why we need both, we can learn from one to another. De'i ashmi'inan bitlushin, that if you tell me that water not accepting ritual impurities, only water that is basically detached from the ground, mishum de'achshevinhu, because they carry some importance. Why? Because if you put it in the vessel, you retroactively set up that you need this water, because otherwise why you bother to take them and put them in a vessel? So because it's already carry an importance, therefore they can pave the way for food to accept ritual impurity. Again, the minute you take that and allocate it in a vessel, you basically demonstrate your idea that that water is a need for certain purposes. So they already carries, halachically speaking, an importance item. Okay? Says, mishum de'achshevinu, because it's important. Aval mechubarim, eimalo. But something that is underground in the cave, you may say that it's not carry that importance. You didn't designate them. Ve'itana mechubarim. Let's go the opposite way. If the pasuk speaks only about water that it's underground, like a cave water, mishum dekaim bebeduchtaihu chashivei, because as long as they are standing in the ground, they are important because they pave the way for food to accept ritual impurity. Aval tlushim eimalo, but maybe water that it's already detached, maybe you may say that it's not machshirei tuma, it's not paved the way to accept ritual impurity. So they said tzriche. So now some rabbis ask a question. All of this discussion apply to water, underground water, water designated, but how about others? So there are those who said that the others, you don't need this ribu, you don't need this mahalach, this way of learning. Tashma. Now we go a little bit on the mikveh. So they said the source for the mikveh, one of the sources in the Torah, they said in the book of Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 11, Ach ma'ayan uvo mikveh ma'im yihyeh ta'or. The Torah said, however, a spring or cistern, like a pit, a gathering of water shall be pure. So what we learn from that? That all water can be rendered impure, with exception of spring water and water of cistern, which are in the exception of the spring water and the exception in the ground. So the Gemara rejected it, and they said, "Ma'yeh tahor." What does that mean? That become ritually impure, ritually pure. He says, "Mitumato," from his ritual impurity. So it's not applied to impurity of liquid at all. So the Chazon Ish here explained that it's only a person who would duck in the water, and that water that it's a pure water. It's not water that she'uvim, that come from someplace. It's running, is like spring. But you hold that the understanding here is if someone purified himself in, like, let's say in the one of those pools, so it's not considering a ritually impure, ritually pure. Utlushim mimachshirim. So how you speak about water that detach from the ground, that be paved the way to accept ritual impurity by Torah law. So veha amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina mashkin beit mitbechaya. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said that regard to liquids of the slaughterhouse in a temple, lo dayan shehen dachan ela she'ein machshirin. It's not enough to say that it's pure, but it's also, it's not preparing food to accept ritual impurity. So let's understand it. Soon we'll build the Beis HaMikdash, right? And in Mitzvah Shem, when you build the Beis HaMikdash, you have a certain area that it's like the kitchen area of the slaughtering house. You're preparing all these korbanos, all the offering. So while you're doing that, there is category of what? Blood that coming out of the korbanot, of the offering, and water that you prepare with all of that. So he says, not only that is pure, because remember that's rabbinic, but it's not by touching any type of food, it's not preparing that food, paving the way of food to become ritually impure. So it means that it's all applied to rabbinic decree only. And when it's come to mashkei beit mitbechaya, the liquid in the slaughtering house in the Beit HaMikdash, the sages did not put a decree there. And you remember we said that they did not want to impose more than they have there. So Tirgema, so they explain what Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said in regard to the water in the slaughtering house. al dam. So that applies specifically of blood of sacred offering, but not at the water. So now we're in a new category. So far we said that it's applied to any liquid. Now we differentiate between blood and water. How do you know that a sacred offering, that while you are in the process of blood coming out, it's not going to transfer ritual impurity? שנאמר על הארץ תשפכנו כמים. The Torah said that while you are slaughtering those animals, they said in Deuteronomy 14, you should put that, you shall surely not eat the blood, you shall pour it upon the earth like water. So the sages derive from that a hekesh. They compare blood to water. Dam shenishpach kamayim, which is blood that was pure like water, which means blood from a non-sacred domesticated animal that pours out when it's slaughtered and it's not received in a vessel of sacrificial blood. It assumed the same halachic legal status of water, and therefore its rendered produce susceptible to ritual impurity. Machshir, it's get the susceptibility to accept a ritual impurity, ritual tum'ah. Just turn the page. 16b. Yes.
I had a quick question. When we were talking about mikvah before, are we allowed to use hot springs as mikvah? Does that count? You know, in Tveria they have the hot springs, the special springs. Can those be used as a mikvah? I guess they can't because they're not dripping water. I mean, can those pools of water, since they're...
In very general term, it's a good question. You have several categories of mikveh. It's not our subject. There are those who hold mikveh has to have a not only the idea of running water, constant running water. There is a mikveh that you build one on the top of the other, and there is certain percentage of raining water. There's mikveh that one next to the other, and you have a mikveh that coming out from below. But the key point is you have to have a status of constant running water, spring water that's running water all the times. So it's really depend how exactly the water runs and what's a category. You should be aware that it's a different segment of observant Jews when it's come to mikveh. They are the highest level of mikveh that it's definitely reach everyone is the running water all the times, purely running water all the time, or making running, and for sure the water is in a percentage. It's partially raining water, but as I said before, it's mainly three different categories. So again, the big question is how exactly you use that water. If it's a direct attach, if it's moved to a certain pipe, and even with the pipe themselves is a question what type of pipe you so for example, if a person put at the top of his roof a large tab, and that transfer water is one category, like partially raining water. There is another one that one stand next to the other and you just transfer it from one domain, from one tab to another. So again, it's not the subject today, but just to give you the idea, it's really depends. So they said here, 16b, dam she'eno nishpach kamayim eino machshir. However, blood that is not poured out like water, but is received in a vessel to be sprinkled on the altar, so does not render produce susceptible to contract impurity. So what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said in regards to a liquid of a slaughtering house, that it's not receiving ritual impurity, he speaks about what? About blood that the Torah said clearly. However, with regard to a water that it's prepared themselves to be susceptible to ritual impurity, it's regardless if it's attached or detached. So therefore, water that come out of a Beit HaMikdash, of the temple slaughtering house, it's ritually impure, even they are detached. Because remember, we said that we derive, Rashi said, it derived from the word v'chol mashke asher yishate, any liquid that was drink. So matkif la Rav Shmuel bar Ami harei dam hatamtzit. He said that how about there's a blood that squeezed from an animal, altered, slaughtered, after once the initial spurt of blood has concluded. So it's the nishpach kamayim, it's pour like a water when you do that, and you cannot sprinkle on the altar. Ve'ino machshir. So it's therefore it does not render produce susceptible to ritual impurity either, and it's part of category of liquid in the slaughtering house. So you have to say that there is a different source of blood in that sacred animal, that it's not susceptible, and it's not because it can pour to the ground like water. So the Gemara said, Amar le Rab Zera hanach ledam tamtzit. He says, leave alone this blood that squeezed after the initial spurt, because that's really an exceptional case. It's not something you derive from others. You know why? That even you talk about non-sacred. What is non-sacred? That someone that was sacred is now is none. So he said, if non-sacred animals, it does not render produce susceptible to ritual impurity either. So if you talk about practical halacha, that blood rendered produce susceptible to ritual impurity, it's applied. The legal status of blood squeezed after the initial spurt is not that of blood at all. Kibla minei Rav Shmuel bar Ami. Rav Shmuel bar Ami received from Rabbi Zera this idea. Why this blood it's not susceptible? The Amar Rachmana, because the Torah, remember they use the word Rachmana, it's like compassion. The Torah is compassionate. They said in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 12, Rak chazak levilti echol adam ki adam hu hanefesh. Only be strong not to eat the blood, for the blood is the soul. So what does that mean? He says, dam she'hanefesh yotz'a bo, which means that's a blood that come out naturally while you're slaughtering the animals. There's a blood come right away, pour out. Karui dam, that's considering blood biblically. Dam she'ein hanefesh yotz'a bo, but different blood that it's not involved with taking away the life of the animals. Eino karui dam. So let's understand. When you take like a needle, you do injection, or vice versa, you pour out blood. So if you pour out blood and the animal is not dead, it's not considering blood for that category. Here, the Torah speaks only in the blood that coming out of the action of what? Slaughtering the animals, that from being a living animal they become dead animal. But that category of blood is called biblically a blood. So he said, other blood, it's not considering liquid, so therefore it's not machshir letuma. So he said, now back to what Rav said. Rav said that liquid was not accepting tuma in any form, biblically speaking. Remember we said the three different categories? Remember at the beginning of this session? So he said, tashma. So now we ask a question according to Rav. Dam shenitma, a blood of offering that become ritually impure, uzrako beshogeg, and the Kohen is so busy of serving on this altar, so what did he do? He, by mistake, that blood was sprinkled on the altar. So they said, Hutza. So the offering, the Korban, is accepted. And therefore, the owner of that animal is atoned. Because remember, the Kohen did it unintentionally, right? And now, this meat, you can go ahead and eat it. Why? Because there is a rule which we learn. You have the tzitz. You remember the tzitz is the dress of the Kohen. They have
the head plate, yeah.
the head plate, that it's atoned for all these categories, that any offering, for example, that involved with ritual impurity, that atone for that. So he said that's apply only if it happened unwittingly. But beshogeg, if it was intentional, lo hutza, which means if the Kohen took the blood and sprinkled it with full intent, then is no longer can be used. That korban is not atone for that person, and therefore they cannot eat it, cannot eat that meat. It's like receive
only b'shogeg.
Right, only b'shogeg, because it's a recipient of ritual impurity. Why? Because as far as receiving ritual impurity is the oraita, it's biblical. So therefore, even that it's come to a slaughtering house, it's ritually impure. So now you remember Yosef ben Yoezer that he said earlier that all the liquid in the slaughtering house in the Beit HaMikdash, it's not transmitted ritual impurity to others, unlike what Rav said. So the Gemara responds and it said mid de Rabbanan. So the whole idea of blood receive ritual impurity is rabbinic, and this Tana hold that the sages put a decree of ritual impurity also upon liquid that come from a slaughtering house. Udelo ke Yosef ben Yoezer Yisrida, and they don't follow Yosef ben Yoezer that said that the sages did not put a decree upon them. So you see here, that's the way Rashi understand that the Yosef ben Yoezer did not hold that this type of liquid received ritual impurity by the Torah. Tosfot disagree with that. We do not have time for this Tosfot. I urge you to read it. It's the Dibur HaMatchil Midrabbanan. Anyway, Tashma. Now we ask a question about Rav. Al ma hatzitz meratze. You remember we said that the front plate of the high priest, the one that we study in Shabbat, that they have the names, etc., Kodesh, Lashem, and all this. So he said, what is that tone? And thereby allowed the blood of the offering to be sprinkled. So they said, al hadam, for the blood, ve'al abasar, and for the meat, ve'al hachelev shenitma, and also for the fat of the offering that become impure. Ben beshogeg, ben bemezi, regardless if it's unwittingly or intentionally. That's basically contradicted to what we said earlier. Soon you see. Ben be'ones, ben beratzon. Regardless whether due to circumstances beyond his control or if it was willfully. Ben beyachid, ben betzibur. Whether it's offering of an individual or if it's a community. So what happened here? What we understand, that the blood of the offering can become pure, which means that the blood of Kodshim, of sacred, it's a recipient of ritual impurity. So you derive from that when it's come to a liquid and it's carry ritual impurity, it's the oraita, it's biblical. So therefore they did not allow in the slaughtering house to make it pure, and that's opposite to what Rav said. So the Tzlach challenged that point, and he said that you see here that it's like contradiction to what we said earlier. So in short, what he said is the idea of blood receiving ritual impurity is the way that we respond here. We said midrabanan, it's rabbinic, and this Tana hold that the sages put a decree of ritual impurity also upon what? Of liquid in the slaughtering house, Udelok Yosef ben Yoezer Yitzrida, and not according to him. So let's wrap up our understanding. We have two schools of thought. One, we have to understand that there are three different categories. Remember, the liquid we said that do not receive any ritual impurity and therefore cannot transmit it. The second one is only receive but not transmit. And the third one is receive and transmit. With that in mind, we go to the next category, which said that when it's come to a slaughtering house, what happened in slaughtering house? We said it's one school of thought that said that it's only the middle one, which is it transmitted but not transfer. And there is any other that said that it's neither one. So Tashma. So now we go in regard to the tzitz. Tzitz is the front part that the high priest have. Book of Shmot, Exodus chapter 28. ונשא אהרון את עוון הקודשים. It shall be upon Aharon's forehead, and Aharon shall bear the sin committed with the consecrated objects, which the children of Israel shall hallow, even with all the sacred gifts. That's the text in the Torah. And it shall be always upon the forehead, and they may be accepted before God. So they ask a question, what do you mean by that? וכי איזה עוון הוא נושא? What exactly you talk about? Here is the high priest, he carried these teeth, and what type of sin that it's bear? If you say that it atoned for what? אם עוון פיגול, הרי כבר נאמר לא ירצה. If you tell me that it's applied to the offering that is disqualified by the intention or to sacrifice or eat, the offering after the permitted time, it's already stated what we said in Leviticus 19, and if it is eaten at all on the third day, it's pigul, and it shall not be accepted. Im avon notar, if it's talk about notar, which is meat, that offering that left after the time that was permitted to eat it, so now it's already too late, and it's left there, so the Torah again said it's already stated. What they said, הרי כבר נאמר, לא יחשב, the Torah said in Vaikra chapter 7, that it will neither shall be credited to his offering. Ha-eno noseh ela avon tum'ah. You have to say that it only bears the sin of impurity. So I explained, I don't have a time. Here in my book, Birah Klomar Berashi al Shas, that Rashi used the word Klomar, and he elaborates on that, what exactly it carries. They say that it's only a avon tum'ah. Why? שהותרה מכללה בציבור. Because from a general prohibition on behalf of the community. So it's permitted to sacrifice communal offering in a temple in a state of impurity. So the Gemara said, my love, tum'ah dam. So what does it apply to? Impure blood. It's applied to what? To blood that can become impure. Omar Rav Papa lo tum'at kmatzim. That's applied to the blood of the impurity of handful of flour separated by the priest from the meal offering. You remember we talked about the priest that carried that, and he have in his finger and he put it in a certain way, and that handful of flour rendered the meal offering permitted to be eaten by the Kohen, parallel to the blood of an animal offering. Now we go to the last question of Rav Tashma. הן יישא איש בשר קודש בכנף בגדו וכנף בכנפו אל הלחם ואל הנזיר ואל היין ואל שמן ואל כל המאכל להקדש וענו ואמרו לא יקדש. Okay, they said about Haggai, we studied a little bit yesterday. Haggai was one of the late prophets before the end era of the prophecy. And they said in the second chapter in the book of Haggai that Haggai gave the Kohanim a certain trials. He wants to test them. It's in a way, it's like you're training someone to do something and you want to make sure that he's doing right. So you give them like some type of quiz or test to see how much they know. So Rashi explains, and that's very important, he doesn't want them to know only biblical laws. He wants the Kohanim to be aware of what? Of rabbinic law as well. So he gave them a scenario and he asked them, what do you do in this scenario? So let's see the text in the book of Haggai, chapter 2. This is what he asked them. If a person, this is Haggai asking the Kohanim at his time. Look, that's a quote. If a person bears hallowed flesh in the corner of his garment, and with his garment he touches bread or stew or wine or oil or any food, shall it be sacred? And the Kohanim, the priest, answered to him and said, no. So Haggai asked this question with regard to what? To a flesh of creeping animal, and he asked if whether or not substances that come into contact with it become ritually impure. So he basically led the Kohanim to understand that this oil is pure. So we said, page 17, ואמר רב השתבש כהנה. Rav said that the Kohanim made here they misconstrue here, they misunderstand. Why? Because the truth is that the fourth category, it's ritually impure. The great-grandson, it's ritually impure, because Haggai brought here four categories. He talked about wine of Nesachim, which is the third one, and oil of the Korban Mincha, that it's the fourth one. So even that's considering Mashke Beit Mitbechaya, that it's a water that come out of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, slaughtering house, and it's not like we just said in the word of Yosef ben Yoezer, that what Yosef ben Yoezer said, that all the liquid in the slaughtering house, it's not even recipient of ritual impurity. Even you said it's rabbinic, so now you said in the Havamina, the way that you understand, that he checked them, Haggai checked them only in the biblical. So the Gemara said, no, mide ha'utama ela lerav, Rav beit mashke bet mitbechaya tane, and mashke bet mitbechaya metame. So it means that Rav included wine and oil, that everything is sacred, and he checked them according to the way that Rashi understand it, that he checked them also in rabbinic decrees. Now you should know that the tzlach have a very different avenue of understanding this sugya, but we do not have time for that. Let's go to a practical halachot. Rambam, Sefer Tahara Ilchot, She'er Avodat Tumah, chapter 14. Safek mashkin letamei, in a case of an uncertainty whether a liquid itself has been rendered ritually impure, it is in our presumption that it's impure. If the issue is whether the liquid is transmitted impurity to another object, it is pure. That's the way that the Mishnah teaches in Tractate Taharot. We talk about a slaughtering house in the Beit HaMikdash, and we say that the blood and water of the slaughtering house in the temple courtyard are entirely pure. They neither contact or not transfer ritual impurity. That's the way that Yosef ben Yoezer said, and that's the Rambam, Ilchot Tum'at Oalim, chapter 10. We also discussed the water of the slaughtering house in the sense of being susceptible for impurity. We said, unlike other liquids, the liquid in a temple slaughtering house do not render food susceptible to impurity. That's the way Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, and that's the Rambam Ilchot Tum'at Oalim, chapter 10. We learn also about Dama Tamtzit. We divided between two different blood. Rambam in that chapter said that an animal's blood that is squeezed out after the initial spurt of blood has concluded and the animal has died does not render food susceptible to impurity. So we explained during the shiur that is a two different category. One, it's blood that coming out while they are slaughtered, and one, the blood that we just draw from the animal, and therefore it doesn't carry the same category. Just also as a side note, remember we talk about the Ritzuya Tzitz. We said that it's based on the Gemara in Shabbat that we learned that the high priest, by carry these tzitz, the front plate, he make an atonement, but not for everything in a certain category, and we discussed it during the shiur.